Hey everybody, can you hear and see me okay? Yay! Okay, good. Yeah, no, I'm still playing with some new settings, so we'll figure this out. All right, so yeah, we've decided to add Sundays. Thank you all for voting in the poll and letting me know when you're free. I realized this book is going to be like so long if we don't. Definitely needed to, you know, add a little bit more time, give ourselves some more time there. So obviously, if you can't join at any given time, I'm always recording. I will always post the review. So no worries there. We are starting off today with chapter 7. Okay, don't worry, Jasmine. I'm just getting things started. I just called you by your real name. I'm so sorry. Um, feel like I definitely don't know you well enough to do that. I'm so sorry. Ah. Cool. All right. So yeah, we'll be starting off on chapter 7. Just give everybody a minute here to get back in, get set up. In the meantime, I want to tell you guys about I unlocked like an old memory the other night that I thought was buried way deep. So my partner has been watching a lot of vampire media with me recently because, come on. And I realized that in our 10 years together, I had never told him about the terrible, terrible vampire movie that I was almost in. And I want to say like 2011, 2012. It was going to be like, well, I was still living in the tiny, awful town that I lived in. And I found it. I found it online. Like they didn't know what they were doing. It was like a no money, like $0 budget production. And they had me going to like training in the park, like with an MMA fighter to teach me combat, which is not the same as combat for a film. And they wanted me to learn combat training in heels, which is not safe. And the reason that I didn't end up doing the movie is 1, because I wasn't taking it seriously because it was very bad, and 2, because I had a scheduling conflict. And then they were like, well, if you can't come to our MMA training in the park, then you definitely can't be in our film. And I was like, okay, I won't be in your film then. But I found the terrible movie. It was so bad. I didn't watch it. I just watched like a clip or two, and it was like they filmed all of the key scenes in front of a green screen. All the backgrounds were just like put in. I know Natalie would not approve of that training at all. It was like, oh my God, it was the worst. I remember they had like a small cast party to like celebrate them taking the first shots or whatever, and it was just at one of the producers' houses, and it was like it was the saddest party I'd ever been to in my life. It was like just like, oh, we've got like this very poor charcuterie board from the grocery store. Just put it on our like falling apart picnic table in our backyard, and I'm like, this is fine if we're just like having to chill, but like this feels really just sad. It was bad. Ugh. But yeah, it was so weird. I just like unlocked that core memory. I'd completely forgotten about it just until we saw a really bad one. And I was like, oh, that's a really bad vampire movie. I was almost in a bad vampire movie. I'm glad that's not me. Awesome, you're back. Okay, cool. So in that case, I think we will get started. Yeah, everybody's got about 15 minutes to get in the door. So if anybody trickles in, we can do like quick little catch-ups, because I mean, like, I barely remember what happens 2 minutes from when I'm done saying it. So yeah, maybe a little bit of a recap of where we left off. I'm pretty sure she just finished like getting all like cleaned up and bathed by the fairy servant woman, and her own clothes have fallen apart, but they were kind enough to give her like pants and a shirt instead of making her wear a dress, which is kind. I suppose. you know. But I don't know. And then beyond that, we met a couple of our fairy people. I don't remember any of their names, so I'm hoping they will remind me. Looks like they will in the first sentence, which is great. Okay, so just to remind you, so then in this first sentence, they talk about the golden-haired High Fae and Lucian. So the golden-haired one is the one who was the beast who captured her a few chapters back, and who brought her here. And so we don't know much about him yet. He's like on purpose not telling her. And then Lucian is this other kind of like, I'm reading him as like a very sort of haughty gentleman who's like pissed that she's there, but he's not aggressive directly towards her. He's just sort of mad she's there. And then, and by the way, I don't know if I'm saying this woman's name correctly, but it's spelled Alice, and I'm saying it Alice. Maybe it's Alice. I don't know. But she's like the servant woman, but who is also a fairy, so I'm not sure like how the hierarchy actually works here. I mean, which is the same as the character, so that's all good. Whose name is Feyre, for quick reminder. That one I've clicked in there. But we'll see who else comes up if I don't remember, and I'll try and pause and let you guys know stuff. Kate Trisha, I know, will definitely remember everything because she's already read the whole book. But I don't know for anybody else where you're at. I definitely don't remember. Thank you. So it is pronounced Alice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Bibino. All right. So chapter 7. The golden-haired High Fae and Lucian were lounging at the table when Alice returned me to the dining room. They no longer had plates before them, but still sipped from golden goblets. Real gold, not paint or foil. Our mismatched cutlery flashed through my mind as I paused in the middle of the room. Such wealth, such staggering wealth when we had nothing. A half-wild beast, Nesta had called me. But compared to him, compared to this place, compared to the elegant, easy way they held their goblets, the way the golden-haired one had called me human, we were all half-wild beasts to the High Fae, even if they were the ones who could don fur and claws. Food still remained on the table, the array of spices lingering in the air, beckoning. I was starving, my head unnervingly light. The golden-haired high fae's mask gleamed with the last rays of the afternoon sunshine. "Before you ask again, the food is safe for you to eat." He pointed to the chair at the other end of the table. No sign of his claws. When I didn't move, he sighed sharply. "What do you want, then?" I said nothing. To eat, flee, save my family. Lucian drawled from his seat along the length of the table. "I told you so, Tamlin." He flicked a glance toward his friends. "Your skills with females have definitely become rusty in recent decades." "Tamlin." He glowered at Lucian, shifting in his seat. I tried not to stiffen at the other bit of information Lucian had given away. Decades. Tamlin didn't look much older than me. But his kind was immortal. He could be hundreds of years old. Thousands. My mouth dried up as I carefully studied their strange masked faces. Unearthly, primal, and imperious. Like immovable gods or pharaoh courtiers. "Well," Lucian said, his remaining russet eye fixed on me. Yes, he only has one eye. "You don't look half as bad now. A relief, I suppose, since you're to live with us, though the tunic isn't as pretty as a dress." Wolves ready to pounce, that's what they were. Just like their friend. I was all too aware of my diction, of the very breath I took as I said, "I'd prefer not to wear that dress." "And why not?" Lucian crooned. It was Tamlin who answered for me. "Because killing us is easier in pants." I kept my face blank, willed my heart to calm as I said, "Now that I'm here, what do you plan to do with me?" Lucian snorted, but Tamlin said with a snarl of annoyance, "Just sit down." An empty seat had been pulled out at the end of the table. So many foods, piping hot and wafting those enticing spices. The servants had probably brought out new food while I'd washed. So much wasted. I clenched my hands into fists. "We're not going to bite." Lucian's white teeth gleamed in a way that suggested otherwise. I avoided his gaze, avoided that strange, animated metal eye that focused on me as I inched to my seat and sat down. Tamlin rose, stalking around the table. Closer and closer, each movement smooth and lethal. A predator blooded with power. It was an effort to keep still, especially as he picked up a dish, brought it over to me, and piled some meat and sauce on my plate. I said quietly, "I can serve myself." Anything to keep him well away from me. Tamlin paused, so close that one swipe of those claws lurking under his skin could rip my throat out. That was why the leather baldric bore no weapons. Why use them when you were a weapon yourself? "It's an honor for a human to be served by a high fae," he said roughly. I swallowed hard. He continued piling various foods on my plate, stopping only when it was heaping with meat and sauce and bread, and then filled my glass with pale, sparkling wine. I loosed a breath as he prowled back to his seat, though he could probably hear it. I wanted nothing more than to bury my face in the plate and then eat my way down the table. But I pinned my hands beneath my thighs and stared at the two fairies. They watched me, too closely to be casual. Tamlin straightened a bit and said, "You look better than before." Was that a compliment? I could have sworn Lucian gave Tamlin an encouraging nod. "And your hair is clean." Perhaps it was my raging hunger making me hallucinate the piss-poor attempt at flattery. Still, I leaned back and kept my words calm and quiet, the way I might speak to any other predator. "You're high fae. Fairy nobility?" Lucian coughed and looked at Tamlin. "You can take that question." "Yes," Tamlin said, frowning, as if searching for anything to say to me. He settled on merely, "We are." "Fine." A man, fairy, a few words. I had killed his friend, was an unwanted guest. I wouldn't want to talk to me either. What do you plan to do with me now that I'm here? Tamlin's eyes didn't leave my face. Nothing. Do whatever you want. So I'm not to be your slave? I dared ask. Lucian choked on his wine, but Tamlin didn't smile. I don't keep slaves. I ignored the release of tightness in my chest at that. But what am I to do? But what am I to do with my life here? I pressed. Do you wish me to earn my keep? To work? A stupid question, if he hadn't considered it, but I had to know. Tamlin stiffened. What you do with your life isn't my problem. Oh, hi, Cat's Kitten Me. Nice to see you. Okay. What you do with your life isn't my problem. Lucian pointedly cleared his throat, and Tamlin flashed him a glare. After an exchanged look I couldn't read, Tamlin sighed and said, Don't you have any interests? No, not entirely true, but I wasn't about to explain the painting to him. Not when he was apparently having a great deal of trouble just talking to me civilly. Lucian muttered, So typically human. Tamlin's mouth quirked to the side. Do whatever you want with your time. Just stay out of trouble. So you truly mean for me to stay here forever? What I meant was, so I'm to stay in this luxury while my family starves to death? I don't make the rules, Tamlin said tersely. My family is starving, I said. I didn't mind begging. Not for this. I'd given my word and held to that word for so long that I had nothing and no one without it. I was nothing and no one without it. Please let me go. There must be some other loophole out of the treaty's rules, some other way to atone. Atone, Lucian said. Have you even apologized yet? Apparently, all attempts to flatter me were dead and gone. So I looked Lucian right in his remaining russet eye and said, I'm sorry. Lucian leaned back in his chair. How did you kill him? Was it a bloody fight or just cold-blooded murder? My spine stiffened. I shot him with an ash arrow, and then an ordinary arrow through the eye. He didn't put up a fight. After the first shot, he just stared at me. Yet you killed him anyway. Though he made no move to attack you, and then you skinned him. Lucian hissed. Enough, Lucian, Tamlin said to his courtier with a snarl. I don't want to hear details. He turned to me, ancient and brutal and unyielding. I spoke before he could say anything. My family won't last a month without me. Lucian chuckled, and I gritted my teeth. Do you know what it's like to be hungry? I demanded, anger rising to devour any common sense. Do you know what it's like to not know when your next meal will be? Tamlin's jaw tightened. Your family is alive and well cared for. You think so low of fairies that you believe I'd take their only source of income and nourishment and not replace it? I straightened. You swear it? Even if fairies couldn't lie, I had to hear it. A low, incredulous laugh. On everything that I am and possess. Why not tell me that? Why not tell me that when we left the cottage? Would you have believed me? Do you even believe me now? Tamlin's claws embedded in the arms of his chair. Sorry guys, I seem to have activated Siri on my computer. I hope you heard all of that and that it wasn't just eaten by some voice-to-text nonsense. Why not tell me that when we left the cottage? Would you have believed me? Do you even believe me now? Tamlin's claws embedded in the arms of his chair. Why should I trust a word you say? You're all masters of spinning your truths to your own advantage. Some would say it's unwise to insult a fae in his home, Tamlin ground out. Some would say you should be grateful for me finding you before another one of my kind came to claim the debt, for sparing your life and then offering you the chance to live in comfort. I shot to my feet, wisdom be damned, and was about to kick back my chair when invisible hands clapped at my arms and shoved me back into the seat. Do not do whatever it was you were contemplating, Tamlin said. I went still at the tang of magic seared my nose. I tried to twist in the chair, testing the invisible bonds. But my arms were secured, and my back was pressed into the wood so hard that it ached. I glanced at the knife beside my plate. I should have gone for it first, futile effort or no. I'm going to warn you once, Tamlin said too softly. Only once, and then it's on you, human. I don't care if you go live somewhere else in Prithian, but if you cross the wall, if you flee, your family will no longer be cared for. His words were like a stone to the head. If I escaped, if I even tried to run, I might very well doom my family. And even if I dared risk it, even if I succeeded in reaching them, where would I take them? I couldn't stow my sisters away on a ship, and once we arrived somewhere else, somewhere safe, we'd have nowhere to live. But for him to hold my family's well-being against me, to throw away their survival if I stepped out of line? I opened my mouth, but his snarl rattled the glasses. Is that not a fair bargain? And if you flee, then you might not be so lucky with whoever comes to retrieve you next. His claws slipped back under his knuckles. The food is not enchanted or drugged, and it will be your own damn fault if you faint. So you're going to sit at this table and eat, Feyre. And Lucian will do his best to be polite. He threw a pointed look in his direction. Lucian shrugged. The invisible bonds loosened, and I winced as I whacked my hands on the underside of the table. The bonds on my legs and middle remained intact. One glance at Tamlin's smoldering green eyes told me that I wanted to know. His guest or not, I wasn't going to get up from this table until I'd eaten something. I'd think about the sudden change in my plans to escape later. For now I eyed the silver fork and carefully picked it up. They still watched me, watched my every move, the flare of my nostrils as I sniffed the food on my plate. No metallic stench of magic, and fairies couldn't lie. So he had to be right about the food, then. Stabbing a piece of chicken, I took a bite. It was an effort to keep from grunting. I hadn't had food this good in years. Even the meals we'd had before our downfall were little more than ashes compared to this. I ate my entire plate in silence, too aware of the high fae observing every bright bite. But I reached for a second helping of chocolate torte. The food vanished. Just vanished, as if it had never existed, not a crumb left behind. Swallowing hard, I set my fork down so they wouldn't see my hand start to shake. One more bite, and you'll hurl your guts up, Tamlin said, drinking deeply from his goblet. The bonds holding me loosened. Silent permission to leave. Thank you for the meal, I said. It was all I could think of. Won't you stay for wine? Lucian said, the sweet venom from where he lounged in his seat. I braced my hands on my chair to rise. I'm tired. I'd like to sleep. It's been a few decades since I last saw one of you, Lucian drawled. But you humans never change, so I don't think I'm wrong in asking why you find our company to be so unpleasant, when surely the men back home aren't much to look at. At the other end of the table, Tamlin gave his emissary a long, warning look. Lucian ignored it. You're high fae, I said tightly. I'd ask why you'd even bother inviting me here at all, or dining with me. Fool. I really should have been killed 10 times over already. Lucian said, True, but indulge me. You're a human woman, and yet you'd rather eat hot coals than sit here longer than necessary. Ignoring this, he waved a hand at the metal eye and brutal scar on his face. Surely we're not so miserable to look at. Typical fairy vanity and arrogance. That, at least, the legends had been right about. I tucked the knowledge away. Unless you have someone back home, unless there's a line of suitors at the door of your hovel that makes us seem like worms in comparison. There was enough dismissal there that I took a little bit of satisfaction in saying, I was close with a man back in my village. Before that treaty ripped me away, before it became clear that you are allowed to do as you please to us, but we can hardly strike back against you. Tamlin and Lucian exchanged glances, but it was Tamlin who said, Are you in love with this man? No, I said as casually as I could. It wasn't a lie, but even if I'd felt anything like that for Isaac, my answer would have been the same. It was bad enough that High Fae now knew my family existed. I didn't need to add Isaac to that list. Again, that shared look between the two males. And do you love anyone else? Tamlin said through clenched teeth. A laugh burst out of me, tinged with hysteria. No! I looked between them. Nonsense. These lethal, immortal beings really had nothing better to do than this. Is this really what you care to know about me? If I find you more handsome than human men? And if I have a man back home? Why bother to ask at all when I'll be stuck here for the rest of my life? A hot line of anger sliced through my senses. We wanted to learn more about you, since you'll be here for a good while, Tamlin said, his lips a thin line. But Lucian's pride tends to get in the way of his manners. He sighed, as if ready to be done with me, and said, Go rest. We're both busy most days, so if you need anything, ask the staff. They'll help you. Why? I asked. Why be so generous? Lucian gave me a look that suggested he had no idea either, given that I'd murdered their companion, but Tamlin stared at me for a long moment. I kill too often as it is, Tamlin said finally, shrugging his broad shoulders. And you're insignificant enough to not ruffle this estate. Unless you decide to start killing us. A faint warmth bloomed in my cheeks, my neck. Insignificant, yes, I was insignificant to their lives, their power. As insignificant as the fading, chipped designs I'd painted around the cottage. Well, I said, not quite feeling grateful at all. Thank you. He gave a distant nod and motioned for me to leave. Dismissed. Like the lowly human I was. Lucian propped his chin on a fist and gave me a lazy half-smile. Enough. I got to my feet and backed towards the door. Putting my back to them would have been like walking away from a wolf, sparing my life or no. They said nothing when I slipped out the door. A moment later, Lucian's barking laugh echoed into the halls, followed by a sharp, vicious growl that shut him up. I slept fitfully that night, and the lock on my bedroom door felt more like a joke than anything. I was wide awake before dawn, but I remained staring at the filigreed ceiling, watching the growing light creep between the drapes, savoring the softness of the down mattress. I was usually out of the cottage by first light, though my sisters hissed at me every morning for waking them so early. If I were home, I'd already be entering the woods, not wasting a moment of precious sunlight, listening to the drowsy chatter of the few winter birds. Instead, the bedroom and the house beyond were silent, the enormous bed foreign and empty. A small part of me missed the warmth of my sisters' bodies overlapping with mine. Nesta must be stretching her legs and smiling at the extra room. She was probably content imagining me in the belly of a fairy, probably using the news as a chance to be fussed over by the villagers. Maybe my fate would prompt them to give my family some handouts. Or maybe Tamlin had given them enough money. Or food, or whatever he thought taking care of them consisted of, to last through the winter. Or maybe the villagers would turn on my family, not wanting to be associated with people tied with Prithian, and run them out of town. I buried my face in the pillow, pulling the blankets higher. If Tamlin had indeed provided for them, If those benefits would cease the moment I crossed the wall, then they'd likely resent my return more than celebrate it. Your hair is clean. A pathetic compliment. I suppose that if he'd invited me to live here, to spare my life, he couldn't be completely wicked. Perhaps he'd just been trying to smooth over our very, very rough beginning. Maybe there would be some way to persuade him to find some loophole, to get whatever magic that bound the treaty to spare me. And if not some way, then someone. I was drifting from one thought to another, trying to sort through the jumble, when the lock on the door clicked, and there was a screech and a thud, and I bolted upright to find Alice in a heap on the floor. The length of rope I'd made from the curtain trimmings now hung loosely from where I'd rigged it to snap into anyone's face. It had been the best I could do with what I had. I'm sorry, I blurted, leaping from the bed, but Alice was already up, hissing at me as she brushed off her apron. She frowned at the rope dangling from the light fixture. What in the bottomless depths of the cauldron is... I didn't think anyone would be in here so early, and I meant to take it down, and... Alice looked me over from head to toe. You think a bit of rope snapping in my face will keep me from breaking your bones? My blood went cold. You think that will do anything against one of us? I might have kept apologizing were it not for the sneer she gave me. I crossed my arms. It was a warning bell to give me time to run, not a trap. She seemed poised to spit on me, but then her sharp brown eyes narrowed. You can't outrun us either, girl. I know, I said, my heart calming at last. But at least I wouldn't face my death unaware. Alice barked out a laugh. My master gave his word that you could live here. Live, not die. We will obey. She studied the hanging bit of rope. But did you have to wreck those lovely curtains? I didn't want to. Tried not to. But a hint of a smile tugged at my lips. Alice strode over to the remnants of the curtains and threw them open, revealing a sky that was still a deep periwinkle, splashed with hues of pumpkin and magenta from the rising dawn. I am sorry, I said again. Alice clicked her tongue. At least you're willing to put up a fight, girl. I'll give you that. I opened my mouth to speak, but another female servant with a bird mask entered. Oh yes, for those of you who haven't been with us before, they all wear these bird masks that are not all birds, they're all animal masks. So kind of like those rich guys in Squid Game if you watch that, but I still think this might be some sort of weird sex thing. I'm not saying it's not yet. I'm not convinced otherwise. A breakfast tray in hand, she bid me a curt good morning, set the tray on a small table by the window, and disappeared into the attached bathing chamber. The sound of running water filled the room. I sat at the table and studied the porridge and eggs and bacon. Bacon. Again, such similar food to what we ate across the wall. I don't know why I'd expected otherwise. Alice poured me a cup of what looked and smelled like tea. Full-bodied, aromatic tea, no doubt imported at great expense. Prythene and my adjoining homeland weren't exactly easy to reach. What is this place? I asked her quietly. Where is this place? It's safe, and that's all you need to know, Alice said, setting down the teapot. At least the house is. If you go poking about the grounds, keep your wits about you. Fine. If she wouldn't answer that, I tried again. What sort of fairies should I look out for, then? All of them, Alice said. My master's protection only goes so far. They'll want to hunt and kill you just for being a human, regardless of what you did to Andress. Andress is the one that she murdered, that she thought was just a wolf. Another useless answer. I dug into my breakfast, savoring each rich sip of tea, and she slipped into the bathing chamber. When I was done eating and bathing, I refused Alice's offer and dressed myself in another exquisite tunic, this one of purple so deep it could have been black. I wished I knew the name of the color, but cataloged it anyway. I pulled on the brown boots I'd worn the night before, and as I sat before a marble vanity, letting Alice braid my wet hair, I cringed at my reflection. It wasn't pleasing, though not for its actual appearance. While my nose was relatively straight, it was the other feature I'd inherited from my mother. I could still remember how her nose would crinkle with feigned amusement when one of her fabulously wealthy friends made some unfunny joke. At least I had my father's soft mouth, though it made a mockery of my two sharp cheekbones and hollow cheeks. I couldn't bring myself to look at my slightly up-tilted eyes. I knew I'd see Nesta or my mother looking back at me. I'd sometimes wondered if that was why my sister had insulted me about my looks. I was a far cry from ugly, but I bore too much of the people we'd hated and loved for Nesta to stand it. For me to stand it, too. Though I suppose that for Tamlin, for High Fae, used to ethereal, flawless beauty, it had been a struggle to find a compliment. Very bastard. Alice finished my plate, and I jumped from the bench before she could weave in little flowers from the basket she'd brought. I would have lived up to my namesake were it not for the effects of poverty, but I never particularly cared. Beauty didn't mean anything in the forest. When I asked Alice what I was to do now, what I was to do with the entirety of my mortal life, she shrugged and suggested a walk in the gardens. I almost laughed, but I kept my tongue still. I'd be foolish to push aside potential allies. I doubted she had Tamlin's ear, and I couldn't press her about it yet. But at least a walk provided a chance to glean some sense of my surroundings, and whether there was anyone else who might plead my case to Tamlin. The halls were silent and empty, strange for such a large estate. They'd mentioned others the night before, but I saw and heard no sign of them. A balmy breeze scented with hyacinth, I realized, if only from Elaine's small garden, floated down the halls, carrying with it the pleasant chirping of a bunting, a bird I wouldn't hear back home for months, if I ever heard them at all. I was almost to the grand staircase when I noticed the paintings. I hadn't let myself really look yesterday, but now, in the empty hall with no one to see me, a flash of color amid a shadowy, gloomy background made me stop. A riot of color and texture that compelled me to face the gilded frame. I'd never seen anything like it. It's just a still life, a part of me said. And it was. A green glass vase with an assortment of flowers drooping over its narrow top. Blossoms and leaves of every shape and size and color. Roses, tulips, morning glory, goldenrod, maiden's lace, peonies. The skill it must have taken to make them look so lifelike, to make them more than lifelike. Just a vase of flowers against a dark background. But more than that, the flowers seemed to be vibrant with their own light, as if in defiance of the shadows gathered around them. The mastery needed to make the glass vase hold that light, to bend the light with the water within, as if the vase did indeed have weight to it atop its stone pedestal. Remarkable. I could have stared at it for hours, and the countless paintings along the hall alone could have occupied my entire day, but garden, plans. Still, as I moved on, I couldn't deny that this place was far more civilized than I'd thought. Peaceful, even, if I was willing to admit it. And if the High Fae were indeed gentler than human legend and rumor had led me to believe, then maybe convincing Alice of my misery might not be too hard. If I could win over Alice, convince her that the treaty had been wrong to demand such payment from me, she might indeed see if there was anything to get me out of this debt, and "You," someone said, and I jumped back a step. In the light of the open glass doors to the garden, a towering male figure stood silhouetted before me. Tamlin. He wore those warrior's clothes, cut close to show off his toned body, and 3 simple knives were now sheathed along his baldric, each long enough to look like it could gut me as easily as his beast's claws. His blonde hair had been tied back from his face, revealing those pointed ears and that strange, beautiful mask. "Where are you going?" he said, gruffly, enough that it almost sounded like a demand. "You." I wondered if he even remembered my name. I took a moment to will enough strength into my legs to rise from my half-crouch. "Good morning," I said flatly. "At least it was a better greeting than you." "You said my time was to be spent however I wanted. I didn't realize I was under house arrest." His jaw tightened. "Of course you're not under house arrest." Even as he bit out the words, I couldn't ignore the sheer male beauty of that strong jaw. The richness of his golden tan skin. He was probably handsome, if he ever took off that mask. When he realized that I wasn't going to respond, he bared his teeth in what I supposed was an attempt at a smile and said, "Do you want a tour?" "No, thank you," I managed to get out, conscious of every awkward motion of my body as I edged around him. He stepped into my path, close enough that he had conceded a step back. "I've been sitting inside all morning. I need some fresh air. And you're insignificant enough that you wouldn't be a bother." "I'm fine," I said, casually dodging him. "You've been generous enough." I tried to sound like I meant it. A half smile, not so pleasant, no doubt unused to being denied. "Do you have some sort of problem with me?" "No," I said quietly, and walked through the doors. He let out a low snarl. "I'm not going to kill you, Feyre. I don't break my promises." I almost stumbled down the garden steps as I glanced over my shoulder. He stood atop the stairs, as solid and ancient as the pale stones of the manor. "Kill, but not harm? Is that another loophole? One that Lucian might use against me? Or anyone else here?" "They're under orders not to even touch you." "Yet I'm still trapped in your realm, for breaking a rule I didn't know existed. Why was your friend even in the woods that day? I thought the treaty banned your kind from entering our lands." He just stared at me. Perhaps I'd gone too far, questioned him too much. Perhaps he could tell why I'd really asked. "That treaty," he said quietly, "doesn't ban us from doing anything except for enslaving you. The wall is an inconvenience. If we cared to, we could shatter it and march through to kill you all." I might be forced to live in Prithian forever, but my family, I dared ask. "And do you care to destroy the wall?" He looked me up and down, as if deciding whether I was worth the effort of explaining. "I have no interest in the mortal lands, though I can't speak for my kind." But he still hadn't answered my question. "Then what was your friend doing there?" Tamlin stilled. Such unearthly primal grace even to his breathing. "There is a sickness in these lands, across Prithian. There has been for almost 50 years now. It is why this house and these lands are so empty. Most have left. The blight spreads slowly, but it has made magic act strangely. My own powers are diminished due to it. These masks," he tapped on his, "are the result of a surge of it that occurred during a masquerade 49 years ago. Even now, we can't remove them." So it's not a sex thing. God damn it. Oh well. But they are fused to their skin, that's horrifying. Stuck in masks for nearly 50 years. I would have gone mad, would have peeled my skin off my face. "You didn't have a mask as a beast, and neither did your friend." "The blight is cruel like that. Either live as a beast, or live with the mask." What sort of sickness is it?" "It's not a disease, not a plague or illness. It's focused solely on magic, on those dwelling in Prithian. Andres was across the wall that day because I sent him to search for a cure. Can it hurt humans? My stomach twisted. Will it spread over the wall? Yes, he said. There is a chance of it affecting mortals. And your territory. More than that, I don't know. It's slow moving, and your kind is safe for now. We haven't had any progression in decades. Magic seems to have stabilized, even though it's been weakened. That he'd even admitted so much spoke volumes about how he imagined my future. I was never going home, never going to encounter another human to whom I might spill this secret vulnerability. A mercenary told me she believed fairies might be thinking of attacking. Is it related? A hint of a smile, perhaps a bit surprised. I don't know. Do you talk to mercenaries often? I talk to whoever bothers to tell me anything useful. He straightened, and it was only his promise not to kill me that kept me from cringing. Then he rolled his shoulders, as if shaking off his annoyance. Was the tripwire you rigged in your room for me? I sucked on my teeth. Can you blame me if it was? I might take an animal form, but I am civilized, Feyre. So he did remember my name, at least. But I looked pointedly at his hands, at the razor-sharp tips of those long, curved claws poking through his tanned skin. Noticing my stare, he tucked his hands behind his back. He said sharply, I'll see you at dinner. It wasn't a request, but I still gave him a nod as I strode off between the hedges, not caring where I was going, only that he stayed far behind. A sickness in their lands, affecting their magic, draining it from them. A magical blight that might one day spread to the human world. After so many centuries without magic, we'd be defenseless against it, against whatever it could do to humans. I wondered if any of the High Fae would bother warning my kind. It didn't take me long to know the answer. Okay, and that's chapter 7. So yeah, I mean, that one was a good long one, so that was about an hour, and the next one's pretty short, so I think we can go into chapter 8. I'm just going to step away for 1 second and get some water, so you guys can all take a little break too, and I'll be back in just a minute or two. All right, cool. There we go. Okay, I think that's good. Wait. Okay. The monitor for my microphone got turned on somehow when I was changing audio there, and I cannot hear myself. I hate it. Especially when it's like that. Ew. Ugh. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, we're about to go into chapter 8. I probably should have changed all of this while I was getting a drink, but well, my hair stuck, my glasses. Just having a time. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it totally throws off my brain because then I'm like hearing myself and I want to respond to myself, or I don't even know how to explain it, but it's, oh my god, it's awful. So yeah, my solution was to just scrap my headphones altogether, which means I won't be able to hear if anything happens with the computer, but that's okay. It should be okay. Nothing's happened yet, so. Yay! That's my name beacon chat now! Welcome! Well, we're getting all settled in here. I didn't say it off the top, but I will just very graciously remind all of you that if you want to, it's very low pressure, but there is a link for tipping, and I would appreciate it. You can fill up my little champagne glass that's down there in the corner. It would make me happy. It would make my heart full, but you don't have to. It's okay. I'm just happy you're here, and I'm happy that you want to share the book with me, and this makes me very happy. Anyway, thank you. You posted the link. Yay. All right. No, it's okay. You're here. The point is you're here. If you can chat, you can chat. If you can't, you can't. And that's okay. I hope that you're enjoying it. I hope you're having a good time. Oh, you're so nice. Okay. So yeah, this one's a shorty chapter, chapter 8. Did I just change it back to chapter 6, or did it not change, or what happened there? I probably just changed it to chapter 6 like a silly person. There we go. Okay, chapter 8. I pretended to meander through the exquisite and silent gardens, mentally marking the paths and clever places for hiding if I ever needed them. He'd taken my weapons, and I wasn't stupid enough to hope for an ash tree somewhere on the property, with which to make my own. But his baldric had been laden with knives. There had been an armory somewhere on the estate. And if not, I would find another weapon. Then, steal it if I had to, just in case. Upon inspection the night before, I learned that there was no lock on my window. Sneaking out and rappelling down the wisteria vines wouldn't be difficult at all. I'd climbed enough trees to not mind the height. Not that I planned to escape, but it was good to know, at least, how I might do so should I ever be desperate enough to risk it. I didn't doubt Tamlin's claim that the rest of Prithian was deadly for a human, and if there was indeed some blight on these lands, I was better off here for the time being. But not without trying to find someone who might plead my case to Tamlin. The Lucian he could do with someone snapping at him, if you've the courage for it, Alice had said to me yesterday. I chewed on my stubby nails as I walked, considering every possible plan and pitfall. I'd never been particularly good with words, but I'd never learned the social warfare my sisters and mother had been so adept at. But I'd been decent enough when selling hides at the village market, so perhaps I'd seek out Tamlin's emissary, even if he detested me. He clearly had little interest in my living here. He'd suggested killing me. Perhaps he'd be eager to send me back, to persuade Tamlin to find some other way to fulfill the treaty, if there even was one. I approached a bench in an alcove blooming with foxglove when the sound of steps on shifting gravel filled the air. 2 pairs of light, quick feet. I straightened, peering down the way I'd come, but the path was empty. I lingered at the edge of an open field of lanky meadow buttercups. The vibrant green and yellow field was deserted. Behind me arose a gnarled crabapple tree in full glorious bloom, the petals of its flowers littering the shaded bench on which I'd been about to sit. A breeze set the branches rustling, a waterfall of white petals flittering down like snow. I scanned the garden, the field, carefully watching and listening for those two sets of feet. There was nothing in the tree or behind it. I just have to say, like, all of this nature and color description is just like, this is my favorite part so far. Guthrie does this very well. A pricking sensation ran down my spine. I'd spent enough time in the woods to trust my instincts. Someone stood behind me, perhaps two of them. A faint sniff and a quiet giggle issued from far too close. My heart leaped into my throat. I cast a subtle glance over my shoulder, but only a shining, silvery light flickered in the corner of my vision. I had to turn around. I had to face it. The gravel crunched, nearer now. The shimmering in the corner of my eye grew larger, separating into two small figures no taller than my waist. My hands clenched into fists. "Feyre!" Alice's voice cut across the garden. I jumped out of my skin as she called me again. "Feyre, lunch!" she hollered. I whirled, a shout forming on my lips to alert her to whatever stood behind me, raising my fists, however futile it would be. But the shining things had vanished, along with their sniffing and giggling, and I found myself facing a weathered statue of two merry, bounding lambs. I rubbed my neck. Alice called me again, and I took a shuddering breath as I returned to the manor. But even as I strode through the hedges, carefully retracing my steps back to the house, I couldn't erase the creeping feeling that someone still watched me, curious, and wanting to play. I stole a knife from dinner that night, just to have something, anything, to defend myself with. It turned out that dinner was the only meal I was invited to attend, which was fine. 3 meals a day with Tamlin and Lucian would have been torturous. I could endure an hour sitting at their fancy table if it made them think I was docile and had no plans to change my fate. When Lucian ranted to Tamlin about some malfunction of the magical, carved eye that indeed allowed him to see, I slipped my knife down the sleeve of my tunic. My heart beat so fast I thought they could hear it, but Lucian continued speaking, and Tamlin's focus remained on his courtier. I suppose I should have pitied them for the masks they were forced to wear, for the blight that had infected their magic and people. But the less I interacted with them, the better, especially when Lucian seemed to find everything I said to be hilariously human and uneducated. Uneducated, like, snapping at him wouldn't help my plans. It would be an uphill battle to win his favor, if only for the fact that I... Oh no, is it not working? That's good to know that it doesn't work. But the less I interacted with them, the better, especially when Lucian seemed to find everything I said to be hilariously human and uneducated. Snapping at him wouldn't help my plans. It would be an uphill battle to win his favor, if only for the fact that I was alive and his friend was not. I'd have to deal with him alone, or risk raising Tamlin's suspicions too soon. Lucian's red hair shone in the firelight, the colors flickering with every movement he made. I bet it's me. That's my name. I bet it's me. I bet I broke a thing, or I connected a thing wrong. I'm constantly doing that. Oh. Thank you. I don't really play video games for the $1 test dono. So at least that worked. That's good news. Lucian's red hair shone in the firelight, the colors flickering with every movement he made, and the jewels in the hilt of his sword glinted, the ornate blade so unlike the baldric of knives still strapped across Tamlin's chest. But there was no one here to use a sword against, and while the sword was embedded with jewels and filigree, it was large enough to be more than decoration. Perhaps it had something to do with those invisible things in the garden. Maybe he'd lost his eye and earned that scar in battle. I fought against a shudder. Alice had said the house was safe, but warned me to keep my wits about me. What might lurk beyond the house, or be able to use my human senses against me? Just how far would Tamlin's order not to harm me stretch? What kind of authority did he hold? Lucian paused, and I found him smirking at me, making the scar even more brutal. Were you admiring my sword, or just contemplating killing me, Feyre? Of course not, I said softly, and glanced at Tamlin. The gold flecks in his eyes glowed, even from the other end of the table. My heart beat at a gallop. Had he somehow heard me take the knife? The whisper of metal on wood? I forced myself to look again at Lucian. His lazy, vicious grin was still there. Act civilized, behave, possibly win him to my side. I could do that. Tamlin broke the silence. Feyre likes to hunt. I don't like to hunt. I should have probably used a more polite tone, but I went on. I hunted out of necessity, and how did you know that? Oh, yay! Thank you. That's my name, B. Audiobooks are so good, and so I'm glad this is working for you and that you're enjoying it. Thank you. Okay. Don't like to hunt. I hunted out of necessity, and how did you know that? Tamlin's stare was bald, assessing. Why else were you in the woods that day? You had a bow and arrows in your house. I wondered whether he'd almost said hovel. When I saw your father's hands, I knew he wasn't the one using them. He gestured to my scarred, calloused hands. You told him about the rations and money from pelts. Fairies might be many things, but we're not stupid. Unless your ridiculous legends claim that about us, too. Oh, hey, new friend, Hopgus. Welcome, I hope you enjoy. We are a little ways in here, just to let you know, because you just popped in, that, so our main character, Feyre, is in the middle of a dinner with, her two captors, I guess. There's Tamlin, who is the main captor we're dealing with at the moment. He's like the guy who came and stole her from her house. And Lucian is also here, and he's sort of like a courtier in Tamlin's court, I think is what's going on. And he's just sort of a sassy man. Sassy man? Good description? I don't know. Ridiculous. Insignificant. I stared at the crumbs of bread and swirls of remaining sauce on my golden plate. Had I been at home, I would have licked my plate clean, desperate for any extra bit of nourishment. And the plates? I could have bought a team of horses, a plow, and a field for just one of them. Disgusting. Lucian cleared his throat. How old are you, anyway? 19. Pleasant, civilized. Lucian tisked. So young and so grave, and a skilled killer already. I tightened my hands into fists, the metal of the knife now warm against my skin. Docile, unthreatening, tame. I'd made my mother a promise, and I'd keep it. Tamlin's looking after my family wasn't the same as my looking after them. That wild, small dream could still come to pass. My sisters comfortably married off, and a lifetime with my father, with enough food for us both and enough time to maybe paint a little, or maybe learn what I wanted. It could still happen, in a faraway land perhaps, if I ever got out of this bargain. I could still cling to that scrap of a dream, though these high fae would likely laugh at how typically human it was to think so small, to want so little. Oh, it's so... Okay, I know you. Hi, nice to see you. Yet any bit of information might help, and if I showed interest in them, perhaps they would warm to me. What was this but another trap in the woods? So I said, "So, is this what you do with your lives? Spare humans from the treaty and have fine meals?" I gave a pointed glance toward Tamlin's baldric, the warrior's clothes, Lucian's sword. Lucian smirked. "We also dance with the spirits under the full moon and snatch human babes from their cradles to replace them with changelings." "Didn't," Tamlin interrupted, his deep voice surprisingly gentle, "didn't your mother tell you anything about us?" I prodded the table with my forefinger, digging my short nails into the wood. My mother didn't have the time to tell me stories. I could reveal that part of my past, at least. Lucian, for once, didn't laugh. After a rather stilted pause, Tamlin asked, "How did she die?" When I lifted my brows, he added a bit more softly, "I didn't see signs of an older woman in your house." Predator or not, I didn't need his pity. But I said, "Typhus, when I was 8. I rose from my seat to leave. "Feyre," Tamlin said, and I half turned. A muscle featured in his cheek. A muscle feathered in his cheek. Lucian glanced between us, that middle eye roving, but kept silent. Then Tamlin shook his head, the movement more animal than anything, and murmured, "I'm sorry for your loss." Dude, that's a really basic thing to say. Just say, like, yes, appropriate, but... I tried to keep from grimacing as I turned on my heel and left. I didn't want or need his condolences, not from my mother, not when I hadn't missed her in years. Let Tamlin dismiss me as a rude, uncouth human not worth his careful watch. I'd be better off persuading Lucian to speak to Tamlin on my behalf. And soon, before any of the others whom they'd mentioned appeared, or this blight of theirs grew, tomorrow I'd speak to Lucian, then test him out a bit. In my room, I found a small satchel in the armoire and filled it with a spare set of clothes, along with my stolen knife. It was a pitiful blade, but a piece of cutlery was better than nothing, just in case I was ever allowed to go and had to leave at a moment's notice. Just in case. And that's chapter 8. Okay, so yeah, I think chapter 9 is an appropriate length for us to move on to that one as well. I'm just waiting for something like, I don't know, more saucy to happen. Nothing's happened yet. We're 9 chapters in. Like, come on. And there's some like vaguely flirty things happening here and there that I'm like, I don't know, but so far. And I'm also kind of excited for it to happen because I have a very different reaction to saucy things than I think maybe some of you are used to. I'm gonna get like teenager giggly, and I'm definitely gonna say like ew gross a whole bunch of times. But that's actually a good thing if I say that. Because I'm 5. I really hope that I've been keeping this count appropriately and that it's not just nonsense, but we'll find out, I guess, when we get to the end and it's like, that number's incorrect. Cool. Okay, chapter 9. The following morning, as Alice and the other servant women prepared my bath, I contemplated my plan. Tamlin had mentioned that he and Lucian had various duties, and aside from running into him in the house yesterday, I'd seen neither of them around. So, locating Lucian, alone, would be the first order of business. The casual question tossed in Alice, I guarantee you I'll say her name like that a million times. Okay. And yes, I know I don't really play video games. I know we've got a character build, and it's important, and I would be saying the book was awful if they didn't do it, but I don't know. I'm just excited. I'm impatient. Okay. A casual question tossed in Alice's direction had her revealing that she believed Lucian was on border patrol today and would be at the stables preparing to leave. I was halfway through the gardens, hurrying toward the outcropping of buildings I'd spied the day before, when Tamlin said from behind me, "No tripwires today?" I froze mid-step and looked over my shoulder. He was standing a few feet away. How had he crept up so silently on the gravel? Very stealth, no doubt. I willed calm into my veins, my head. I said as politely as I could, "You said I was safe here, so I listened." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he put on what I suppose was an attempt at a pleasant smile. "My morning work was postponed," he said. Indeed, his usual tunic was off, the baldric gone, and the sleeves of his white shirt had been rolled up to the elbows to reveal tan forearms corded with muscles. "If you want to ride across the grounds, if you're interested in your new residence, I can take you." Again, that effort to be accommodating, even when every word seemed to pain him. Maybe he could eventually be swayed by Lucian. And until then, how much could I get away with? If he was going to such lengths to make his people swear not to harm me, to shield me from the treaty? I smiled blandly and said, "I'd prefer to spend today alone, I think, but thank you for the offer." He tensed. "What about—" "No, thank you," I interrupted, marveling a bit at my own audacity. But I had to catch Lucian alone, had to feel him out. He might already be gone. Tamlin clenched his hands into fists, as if fighting against the claws itching to burst out. But he didn't reprimand me, didn't do anything other than prowl back into the house without another word. Soon enough, if I was lucky, Tamlin wouldn't be my problem anymore. I hurried for the stables, tucking away the information. Maybe one day, if I was ever released, if there was an ocean and years between us, I would think back and wonder why he bothered. I tried not to look too eager, too out of breath when I finally reached the pretty painted stables. It didn't surprise me that the stable boys all wore horse masks. For them, I felt a shed of pity at what the blight had done. The ridiculous masks they now had to wear until someone could figure out how to undo the magic binding them to their faces. But none of the stable hands even looked at me, either because I wasn't worth it or because they, too, resented me for the death of Andras. I didn't blame them. Any attempt at casualness took a stumble when I finally found Lucian astride a black gelding grinning down at me with two white teeth. "Morning, Feyre." I tried to hide the stiffening in my shoulders, tried to smile a bit. "Going for a ride, or merely reconsidering Tam's offer to live with us?" I tried to recall the words I'd come up with earlier, the words to win him, but he laughed, and not pleasantly. "Come now, I'm to patrol the southern woods today, and I'm curious about the abilities you used to bring down my friend, whether accidental or not. It's been a while since I encountered a human, let alone a fey killer. Indulge me in a hunt." Perfect. At least that part of this had gone well. Even it sounded as lovely as facing a bear in its den. So I stepped aside to let a stable boy pass. He moved with a fluid smoothness, like all of them here, and didn't look at me either. No indication at all of what he thought of having a fey killer in his stable. But my kind of hunting couldn't be done on horseback. Mine consisted of careful stalking and well-laid traps and snares. I didn't know how to give chase atop a horse. Lucian accepted a quiver of arrows from the returning stable boy with a nod of thanks. Lucian smiled in a way that didn't meet that metal eye, or the russet one. "No ash arrows today, unfortunately." I clenched my jaw to keep a retort from slipping off my tongue. If he was forbidden from hurting me, I couldn't fathom why he would invite me along. save to mock me in whatever way he could. Perhaps he was truly that bored. Better for me. So I shrugged, looking as bored as I could. Well, I suppose I'm already dressed for a hunt. Perfect, Lucian said, his metal eye gleaming in the sunlight, slanting in through the open stable doors. I prayed Tamlin wouldn't come prowling through them. Prayed he wouldn't decide to go for a ride on his own and catch us there. Let's go, then, I said, and Lucian motioned for them to prepare a horse. I leaned against a wooden wall as I waited, keeping an eye on the doorway for signs of Tamlin, and offered my own bland replies to Lucian's remarks about the weather. Mercifully, I was soon astride a white mare, riding with Lucian through the spring-shrouded woods beyond the gardens. I kept a healthy distance from the fox-masked fairy on the broad path, hoping that eye of his couldn't see through the back of his head. The thought didn't sit well, and I shoved it away, along with the part of me that marveled at the way the sun illuminated the leaves and the clusters of crocuses that grew like flashes of vibrant purple against the brown and green. Those were things that weren't necessary to my plans, useless details that only blocked out everything else. The shape and slope of the path, what trees were good for climbing, sounds of nearby water sources. Those things could help me survive if I ever needed to. But, like the rest of the grounds, the forest was utterly empty. No sign of fairies, nor any high fae wandering around, just as well. Well, you certainly have the quiet part of hunting down, Lucian said, falling back to ride beside me. Good. Let him come to me, rather than me seeming too eager, too friendly. I adjusted the weight of the quiver strap across my chest, then ran a finger along the smooth curve of the yew bow in my lap. The bow was larger than the one I used at home, the arrows heavier and heads thicker. I would probably miss whatever target I found until I adjusted to the weight and the balance of the bow. 5 years ago, I'd taken the very last of my father's coppers from our former fortune to purchase my bow and arrows. I'd since allotted a small sum every month for arrows and replacement strings. Well, Lucian pressed, no game good enough for you to slaughter? We've passed plenty of squirrels and birds. The canopy above cast shadows upon his fox mask, light and dark and gleaming metal. You seem to have enough food on your table that I don't need to add to it, especially when there's always plenty left over. I doubted squirrel would be good enough for their table. Lucian snorted but didn't say anything else as we passed beneath a flowering lilac, its purple cones drooping low enough to graze my cheek like cool, velvety fingers. The sweet, crisp scent lingered in my nose even as we rode on. Not useful, I told myself, although the thick brush beyond it would be a good hiding spot if I needed one. You said you were an emissary for Tamlin, I ventured. Do emissaries usually patrol the grounds? A casual, disinterested question. Lucian clicked his tongue. I'm Tamlin's emissary for formal uses, but that was Andros's shift, so someone needed to fill it. It's an honor to do it. I swallowed hard. Andros had a place here, and friends here. He hadn't been just some nameless, faceless fairy. No doubt he was more missed than I was. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I didn't know what he meant to you all. Lucian shrugged. Tamlin said as much, which was no doubt why he brought you here. Or maybe you looked so pathetic in those rags that he took pity on you. I wouldn't have joined you if I'd known you would use this ride as an excuse to insult me. Alice had mentioned that Lucian could use someone who snapped back at him. Easy enough. Lucian smirked. Apologies, Feyre. I might have called him a liar for that. I might have called him a liar for that apology had I not known he couldn't lie, which made the apology sincere. I couldn't sort it out. So, he said, when you were going When are you going to start trying to persuade me to beseech Tamlin to find a way to free you from the treaty's rules? I tried not to jolt. What? That's why you agreed to come out here, isn't it? Why you wound up at the stables exactly as I was leaving? You shot me a sideways glance with that russet eye of his. Honestly, I'm impressed. And flattered you think I have that kind of sway with Tamlin. I wouldn't reveal my hand. Not yet. What are you talking? He cocked his head. His cocked head was answer enough. He chuckled and said, Before you waste one of your precious few human breaths, let me explain two things to you. One, if I had my way, you'd be gone, so it wouldn't take much convincing on your part. Two, I can't have my way because there is no alternative to what the treaty demands. There's no extra loophole. But there has to be something. I admire your balls, Feyre, I really do. Or maybe it's stupidity. But since Tam won't gut you, which was my first choice, you're stuck here. Unless you want to rough it out on your own in Prithian, which... He looked me up and down. I'd advise against... No, I couldn't just stay here. Forever. Until I died. Maybe there was some other way, or someone else who could find a way out. I mastered my uneven breathing, shoving away the panicked, bleeding thoughts. A valiant effort, Lucien said with a smirk. I didn't bother hiding the glare I cut in his direction. We rode on in silence, and aside from a few birds and squirrels, I saw nothing, heard nothing unusual. After a few minutes, I'd quieted my riotous thoughts enough to say, Where is the rest of Tamlin's court? They all fled this blight on magic? How'd you know about the court? He asked so quickly that I realized he thought I meant something else. I kept my face blank. Do normal estates have emissaries? And servants chatter. Isn't that why you made them wear bird masks to that party? Lucien scowled. That scar's stretching. We each chose what to wear that night to honor Tamlin's shape-shifting gifts. The servants too. But now, if we had the choice, we'd peel them off with our bare hands, he said, tugging on his own. It didn't move. What happened to the magic to make it act that way? Lucien let out a harsh laugh. Something was sent from the shitholes of hell, he said, then glanced around and swore. I shouldn't have said that. If word got back to her... Who? The color had leached from his sun-kissed skin. He dragged a hand through his hair. Never mind. The less you know, the better. Tam might not find it troublesome to tell you about the blight, but I wouldn't put it past a human to sell the information to the highest bidder. I bristled, but the few bits of information he released lay before me like glittering jewels. A her who scared Lucien enough to make him worry, to make him afraid someone might be listening, spying, monitoring his behavior. Even out here, I studied the shadows between the trees, but found nothing. Prithian was ruled by 7 high lords. Perhaps this she was whoever governed this territory. If not high lord, then a high lady. If that was even possible. How old are you? I asked, hoping he'd keep divulging some more useful information. It was better than knowing nothing. Old, he said. He scanned the brush, but I had a feeling his darting eyes weren't looking for game. His shoulders were too tense. What sort of powers do you have? Can you shapeshift like Tamlin? He sighed, looking skyward before he studied me warily. That metal eye narrowing with unnerving focus. Trying to figure out my weaknesses so you can... I glowered at him. Fine. No, I can't shapeshift. Only Tam can. But your friend, he appeared as a wolf. Unless that was his... No. Andras was high fae too. Tam can shift us into other shapes if need be. He saves it for his sentries only, though. When Andres went across the wall, Tam changed him into a wolf, so he wouldn't be spotted as a fairy, though his size was probably indication enough. A shudder went down my spine, violent enough that I didn't acknowledge the red-hot glare Lucian lobbed my way. I didn't have the nerve to ask if Tamlin could change me into another shape. Anyway, Lucian went on, the High Fae didn't have specific powers the way the lesser fairies do. I don't have a natural-born affinity, if that's what you're asking. I don't clean everything in sight, or lure mortals to a watery death, or grant you answers to whatever questions you might have if you trap me. We just exist. To rule. I turned in the other direction, so he couldn't see as I rolled my eyes. I suppose if I were one of you, I'd be one of the fairies, not High Fae, a lesser fairy like Alice, waiting on you hand and foot. He didn't reply, which amounted to a yes. With that arrogance, no wonder Lucian found my presence as a replacement for his friend to be abhorrent. And since he would probably loathe me forever, since he'd ended my scheming before it had even begun, I asked, "How'd you get that scar?" I didn't keep my mouth shut when I should have, and was punished for it. Tamlin did that to you? Cauldron, no. He wasn't there, but he got me the replacement afterwards. So is Cauldron like a curse? Like what we use instead of Jesus? Or whatever. That's a little clunky. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. We'll have to find it. I'll have to find how that feels. More answers that weren't answers. So there are fairies who will actually answer any questions if you trap them? Maybe they know how to free me from the treaty's terms. Yes, he said tightly. The Surreal. But they're old and wicked and not worth the danger of going out to find them. And if you're stupid enough to keep looking so intrigued, I'm going to become rather suspicious and tell Tam to put you under house arrest. Though I suppose you would deserve it if you were indeed stupid enough to seek one out. They had to live nearby, then, if he was this concerned. Lucian whipped his head to the right, listening, his eye whirring softly. The hair on my neck stood, and I had my bow drawn in a heartbeat, pointing in the direction Lucian stared. "Put your bow down," he whispered, his voice low and rough. "Put your damned bow down, human, and look straight ahead." I did as he said, the hair on my arms rising as something rustled in the brush. "Don't react," Lucian said, forcing his gaze ahead too, the middle eye going still and silent. "No matter what you feel or see, don't react. Don't look. Just stare ahead." I started trembling, gripping the reins in my sweaty hands. I might have wondered if this was some kind of horrible joke, but Lucian's face had gone so very, very pale. Our horses' ears flattened against their heads, but they continued walking, as if they had also understood Lucian's command. And then I felt it. Ooh, and that's Chapter 9. Chapter 10 is very short, so rather than leave it on this cliffhanger, I think we will continue. I think we got enough time. We can keep going for a little bit here, if everybody's comfy. Okay, let's go. Okay, so Chapter 10. My blood froze as a creeping, leeching cold lurched by. I couldn't see anything. Just a vague shimmering in the corner of my vision, but the horse stiffened beneath me. I willed my face into blankness. Even the balmy spring woods seemed to recoil, to wither and freeze. The cold thing whispered past, circling. I could see nothing, but I could feel it. And in the back of my mind, an ancient, hollow voice whispered, "I will grind your bones between my claws. I will drink your marrow. I will feast on your flesh. I am what you fear. I am what you dread. Look at me. Look at me. I tried to swallow. My throat had closed up. I kept my eyes on the trees, on the canopy, on anything but the cold mass circling us again and again. Look at me. I wanted to look. I needed to see what it was. Look at me. I stared at the coarse trunk of a distant elm, thinking of pleasant things like hot bread and full bellies. I will fill my belly with you. I will devour you. Look at me. A starry, unclouded night sky, peaceful and glittering and endless, summer sunrise, a refreshing bath in a forest pool, meetings with Isaac, losing myself for an hour or two in his body, in our shared breaths. It was all around us, so cold that my teeth chattered. Look at me. I stared and stared at that ever-nearing tree trunk, not daring to blink. My eyes strained, filling with tears, and I let them fall, refusing to acknowledge the thing that lurked around us. Look at me. And just as I thought I would give in, when my eyes hurt so much from not looking, the cold disappeared into the brush, leaving a trail of still, recoiling plants behind it. Only after Lucian exhaled and our horses stood their heads did I dare sag in my seat. Even the crocuses seemed to straighten again. What was that? I asked, brushing the tears from my face. Lucian's face was still pale. You don't want to know? Please, what is that? Cereal you mentioned? Lucian's russet eye was dark as he answered hoarsely. No, it was a creature that should not be in these lands. We call it the bogue. I'm going to say bogue. It could be bogue. It could be bogue. B-O-G-G-E. I'm going to go with bogue. You cannot hunt it. You cannot kill it, even with your beloved ash arrows. Why can't I look at it? Because when you look at it, when you acknowledge it, that's when it becomes real. That's when it can kill you. A shiver spider-walked down my spine. This was the Prithian I'd expected, the creatures that made humans speak of them in hushed tones, even now. The reason I hadn't hesitated, not for a heartbeat, when I considered the possibility of that wolf being a fairy. I heard its voice in my head. It told me to look. Lucian rolled his shoulders. Well, thank the cauldron that you didn't. Cleaning up that mess would have ruined the rest of my day. He gave me a wan smile. I didn't return it. I still heard the bogue's voice whispering between the leaves, calling to me. After an hour of meandering through the trees, hardly speaking to each other, I'd stopped trembling enough to turn to him. So you're old, I said, and you carry around a sword and go on border patrol. Did you fight in the war? Fine. Perhaps I hadn't quite let go of my curiosity out of his eye. He winced. Shit, Farah, I'm not that old. Are you a warrior, though? Would you be able to kill me if it ever came to that? Lucian huffed a laugh. Not as good as Tam, but I know how to handle my weapons. He patted the hilt of his sword. Would you like me to teach you how to wield a blade? Or do you already know how? Oh, mighty mortal huntress. If you took down Andres, you probably don't need to learn anything. Only where to aim, right? He tapped on his chest. I don't know how to use a sword. I only know how to hunt. Same thing, isn't it? For me, it's different. Lucian fell silent, considering. I suppose you humans are such hateful cowards that you would have wet yourself, curled up and waited to die if you'd known beyond a doubt what Andres truly was. Insufferable. Lucian sighed as he looked me over. Do you ever stop being so serious and dull? Do you ever stop being such a prick? I snapped back. Dead. Really, truly, I should have been dead for that. But Lucian grinned at me. Much better. Alice, it seemed, had not been wrong. Whatever tentative truce we built that afternoon vanished at the dinner table. Tamlin was lounging in his usual seat, a long claw out and circling his goblet. It paused on the lip as soon as I entered, Lucian on my heels. His green eyes pinned me to the spot. Right. I'd brushed him off that morning, claiming I wanted to be alone. Tamlin slowly looked at Lucian, whose face had turned grave. We went on a hunt, Lucian said. I heard, Tamlin said roughly, glancing between us as we took our seats. And did you have fun? Slowly, his claw sank back into his flesh. Lucian didn't answer, leaving it to me. Coward. I cleared my throat. Sort of, I said. Did you catch anything? Every word was clipped out. No. Lucian gave me a pointed cough, as if urging me to say more. But I had nothing to say. Tamlin stared at me for a long moment, then dug into his food, not all that interested in talking to me either. Then Lucian quietly said, Tam. Tamlin looked up, more animal than fey in those green eyes, a demand for whatever it was Lucian had to say. Lucian's throat bobbed. The bow was in the forest today. The fork in Tamlin's hand folded in on itself. He said with lethal calm, You ran into it? Lucian nodded. It moved past, but came close. It must have snuck through the border. Metal groaned as Tamlin's claws punched out, obliterating the fork. He rose to his feet with a powerful, brutal movement. I tried not to tremble at the contained fury, at how his canines seemed to lengthen as he said, Where in the forest? Lucian told him. Tamlin threw a glance in my direction before stalking out of the room and shutting the door behind him with unnerving gentleness. Lucian loosed a breath, pushing away his half-eaten food and rubbing at his temples. Where is he going? I asked, staring toward the door. To hunt the bogue. You said it couldn't be killed, that you can't face it. Tam can. My breath caught of it. The gruff, high fae, half-heartedly flattering me was capable of killing a thing like the bogue. And yet he'd served me himself that first night, offered me life rather than death. I'd known he was lethal, that he was a warrior of sorts, but... So he went to hunt the bogue where we were earlier today? Lucian shrugged. If he's going to pick up a trail, it would be there. I had no idea how anyone could face that immortal horror, but it wasn't my problem. And just because Lucian wasn't going to eat anymore didn't mean I wouldn't. Lucian, lost in thought, didn't even notice the feast I downed. I returned to my room and, awake and with nothing else to do, began monitoring the garden beyond for any signs of Tamlin's return. He didn't come back. I sharpened the knife I'd hidden away on a bit of stone I'd taken from the garden. An hour passed, and still Tamlin didn't return. The moon showed her face, casting the garden below in silver and shadow. Ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous to watch for his return, to see if he could indeed survive against the bogue. I turned from the window, about to drag myself into bed. But something moved out in the garden. I lunged for the curtains beside the window, not wanting to be caught waiting for him, and peered out. Not Tamlin, but someone lurked by the hedges, facing the house, looking toward me. Male, hunched, and the breath went out of me as the fairy hobbled closer, just 2 steps into the light leaking from the house. Not a fairy, but a man. My father. Oh, bad business daddy is here. That's the end of the chapter, folks. Okay, so yeah, I don't know how he got there, but daddy's here. All right, everyone, I think that's probably a good place for us to end tonight. or this afternoon. I hope Sundays. Yeah, I know, right? So these chapters are quick, but there's a lot of them. Like the book, we've still got a lot of book. Yeah, we'll just have to see next time. Yeah, just a reminder, we're doing Wednesdays and Sundays now. So I hope that both those times work for people. If not, you can always catch up on the YouTube. I'm going to be posting this one as soon as we're done, and vice versa. So everything from the past is there too. And yeah, this seemed like this worked pretty well. We've got a few people here, and we'll see you all on Wednesday. And I'll see you tonight at Gloss, those of you who are joining. I'm really excited to do some painting with you. That's my name. It's going to be so exciting. You're always so good, and I love your art, so I'm so excited. All right, I'll see you all tonight. Bye.